And now we arrive to the last of our guests. Our guest is a ICREA researcher also. He was born in Belgium, but he developed most of his career in the United States. Finally, he arrived to Catalonia almost 6 years ago, and he is a biolinguistics expert. Welcome, CEDRIC BOECKX.
Let me start by thanking you, Patricia, for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what I do, what we are interested in solving as problems. I don't think that I deserve the title creator, but for a living I build bridges, not bridges where people can, actually travel on, but where ideas can travel on. And the ideas are supposed to link different disciplines. I moved to Catalonia about 6 years ago from the United States with a PhD in linguistics under my arms. And if you hear that, you suspect that I'm interested in languages. And actually I'm not. Linguistics is many things, but for me, it's a discipline that asks one of the most fascinating questions about human nature. It asks, how come we have this ability, and perhaps not even this ability, this necessity or this reflex to spontaneously acquire at least one language in our life? If everything goes right, if there is nothing strange in the environment, we'll be able to acquire the language spoken around us. And many people, beginning with philosophers and now more with hardcore scientists, believe that this is actually telling us something about what makes us human. And that's the question that I'm interested in. But to solve this question, we have to go a little bit beyond philosophy. We have to go a little bit beyond what linguists are doing. We have to actually combine the insights from various disciplines. In particular, we have to take really very seriously the many results that biologists are providing us about what makes us human. And so what we try to do, and I say we because I'm not alone in this enterprise, what we try to do is if you want, act as translators. We try to listen to all sides, to all different disciplines, and to try to create a common language that will enable those various insights to actually converge on an interesting hypothesis that we can then test, or several hypotheses that we can then test. And I think there's never been a better time to actually do this sort of combination between a field like linguistics and a big field like biology, hence the term biolinguistics. It's this attempt to try to take advantage of all the recent findings in the various disciplines and also appreciate the complexity of each of these disciplines. If there is one breakthrough that I want to mention, it's the ability that Svante Pääbo and other people since then have actually created, namely this ability to retrieve ancient genetic information from bones. Traditionally, people thought that we cannot say much about human cognition, the human mind, language from the bones. They are silent, there was no recording, forget about them. Until actually people managed to retrieve genetic information from those bones, and then they enabled us to ask another question, namely, if we have that information about this, can we actually take that information and actually build an inferential process from the genes to what actually creates the modern mind, namely cognition. And in order to do that, we have to study the brain. We have to understand the relationship between genes, brains, and eventually language or cognition more generally. So we have to link various bits and pieces of a big puzzle coming from genetics, coming from neuroscience, coming from linguistics, coming from archaeology, link bones, genes, brains, and come up with an answer that makes sense for everyone. And so we inhabit a field that sort of sits in the middle, that's at the crossroads of various disciplines, and looks at language and cognition pretty much like Gaudi saw or created a mosaic, different bits and pieces that we have to put together to create a pattern that makes sense. And so I came to an institution like ICREA because that institution defines itself as an institution without walls. And I thought it was a perfect environment to start building bridges. So this is why we do the work we do here. Thank you.
So, great. So, come here. So you were first, as you said, working in the US.
That's correct.
Where were you working?
Well, I moved from Belgium when I was 20. Got my PhD in Connecticut in the United States. And then a few years after that, I taught at Harvard for 6 years.
So, and from that?
And then from Harvard, I moved to Barcelona.
To Barcelona. And here, how is your work environment? I mean, your team?
The team is sort of twofold. There is a very small nucleus of brilliant students that work with me that are interested in the same questions. And that nucleus connects with the various experts that we find in Barcelona. We find great people in genomics, in neuroscience, in archaeology, and we try to get to understand from them the sort of complexity and nature of their findings. And then we put all those findings together and try to put forth something that, you know, a story that makes sense for everyone.
I find that very difficult. I mean, complex, challenging. Because when I was reading the article you sent me, it fascinated me what you were explaining about the language-ready brain that we have. We come with that built-in when we are born, the
That's
modern
correct.
human. So talk a little bit about that.
It's true that it's complex because students who are interested in this field don't have to become an expert in just one discipline. They have to become an expert in at least 2, but potentially 3 or 4. But you know, it's also, that complexity is also richness. It's just like when you learn different languages or different cultures, I think you become a richer person by just gaining that knowledge from various sources. And likewise in academia, well, you can do this sort of thing that people call interdisciplinarity, that makes you not an expert in one thing, but a bridge builder, right? And so one thing we've known for quite a while is that humans are special in, unlike even our closest relatives, in this ability to acquire the language of the environment as a reflex. See, if I put another species next to me and I'm raised with that animal, I will acquire the language of the environment, but that species will not. It will do many, many interesting things that I will not be able to do, but language will be this one thing that will characterize us. And so it looks like, as a child, our brain is sort of ready to soak in the language of the environment. And we have to understand what it is about our biology that makes it possible. That's the puzzle.
So other thing that caught my attention was the fact that I never thought that our anatomy or the globularity you were talking would determine the capacity of acquiring the language, because it would mean that somebody finding the bone would really infer that the language could be or could not be acquired.
Well, this is actually a specific hypothesis that we have been exploring for a couple of years. It turns out that we have lots of information about skulls from, you know, anatomically modern humans, but also you know, closely related species that disappeared, and also living species. And it turned out that when you look at the skulls, you see differences, and in fact, those skulls are used to define some species as anatomically modern or not. Mm-hmm. And so we came up with this idea of trying to understand how come the skull acquires the shape that it does. And there is a particular period in your life where the main factor driving the shape of your skull is actually the brain that grows inside it. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that you can actually understand quite a bit about brain growth by just figuring out how the skull forms in the first year of life. But in the first year of life, it's not that your brain develops and your skull forms. There's also a wonderful thing that happens, namely children start acquiring their language. So in that period of time, brain growth also correlates with the first steps of language acquisition. And so we are trying to come up with a hypothesis that links these things, namely how the brain grows, how it reacts to the environment to acquire language, and eventually how we could use skulls to derive information about what sort of brain it takes to actually be ready for the language of the environment.
The question that I would have is, what is first? Because I mean, also the environmental input is very important for the development of the brain and the growth of the brain, and the growth of the brain also shapes the skull. So when it starts, what is first? What is
what is first? As usual, the answer to that complex question is yes. Namely, everything has to happen together. But there is one thing that I'd like to add. You're right that the environment is also particularly important for the brain to actually derive its information. But it's also true that it's in part our biology that determines the environment that we actually create. So we are a remarkably social species and cooperative species, unlike many other closely related species. That too is part of our biology. That is, there must have been changes at the level of the genes or even more complex levels of description that made it possible for us to start cooperating and build the environment that we are building, that makes,
the
in part,
too, yeah.
You know, the right context for language to emerge.
So it's very complex.
So there is no single factor that you can, you know, highlight at the expense of the others. You have to juggle with all these balls in your hands all the time.
And also, other interesting thing is how having this globularity, this special shape, also determines the way the brain computes or the information.
It's correct. See, there is one thing that's remarkable that I think many people can sympathize with, is that we know of many people, unfortunately, that suffer from mental disorders. And many of these people, these individuals that you can see, actually look quite different. They have facial types that are distinct from the norm. Even though everyone is sort of different, you recognize immediately someone with, say, Down syndrome, for example. And this sort of facial phenotype, and also their skull phenotype, is actually dictated by the fact that their brains grow differently.
In a different way.
And that will determine actually also their mental profile. And so we try to understand how this sort of hypothesis that we are interested in at the level of evolution could actually tell us something at the clinical level. That is, could we actually understand why these people tend to have problems with language or with other aspects of cognition if we can actually link the information from genes, the information from brain growth, and skull shape.
And could we, or are we close to determine the set of genes that determine that, or are we far from that?
You'll get a different answer from me depending on the day. If I feel good, I'll say we're very close. If I don't feel so good, we are very far. No, I think that we have a couple of candidates, but there are so many more that we need to discover. I mean, even those candidates that we understand best, we only understand a fraction of actually their nature. So if we have maybe 5 or 6 candidates at this point, or maybe 10 or 20, we have to realize that probably there's going to be 1,000 or 2,000 candidates at the end. So that gives us, you know, a sort of perspective. We have to be modest about the results that we can also get. But at the same time, it's a good argument for recruiting young people, because we need all the help that we can get.
Yes, it is an exciting time in this century when we are just so close.
That's right. I think that there's never been a time where people had as much information as now. See, this word that many people like to use called big data, where lots of disciplines are gathering huge amount of data. And that's great, that's very useful. But in addition to big data, you need big theory to understand that data. And so there's never been as good a time as now to actually link this massive information to yield understanding. That is to turn the facts into knowledge.
And to transfer them to the community, to society.
And then, of course, return.
And you have done a lot in that sense, because I remember when I asked you, how many books have you written? And even you were saying you are not a creator. Your answer was between 15 and 20.
No, I said too many. That was my answer.
Oh.
But yeah, it's correct.
That's a big output. I mean, the production of books.
It comes with the fact that, you know, the work we do is made possible through, directly or indirectly, society. And even if we do basic sciences, we have to make sure that we give back the sort of knowledge that we have acquired in a way that people are able to appreciate. And it doesn't have to be extremely applied results. I mean, lots of people are interested in just understanding things better. And well, if I can contribute to that a little by writing books, why not?
That's also something that makes us human. I mean, that characterize our species.
It's this curiosity that we have that, well, you know, is also at least part of the problem. See, when I said that linguists aren't just working on languages, they are also interested in phenomena like creativity, like curiosity, all these things that...
Music as language.
That's right. Music creators, creating mathematics, creating tons of systems that other species that are otherwise extremely intelligent don't, you know, don't think about. And so that's what we look at.
So that's so interesting. What you do is so interesting that we will need another program to continue talking and also talk about this thing I read in your blog. What is your blog, just for people to
Well, we have a group that's called the Biolinguistics Initiative Barcelona. And we decided that the best way to convey our results or activities is to actually follow through a blog. And so I invite you all to take a look. So this group is called Biolinguistics Initiative Barcelona. It's very easy to find, and you will find what we do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cedric.
People can, you know, actually travel on, but where ideas can travel on. And the ideas are supposed to link different disciplines. I moved to Catalonia about 6 years ago from the United States with a PhD in linguistics under my arms. And if you hear that, you suspect that I'm interested in languages, and actually I'm not. Linguistics is many things, but for me, it's a discipline that asks one of the most fascinating questions about human nature. it asks, how come we have this ability, and perhaps not even this ability, this necessity or this reflex to spontaneously acquire at least one language in our life? If everything goes right, if there is nothing strange in the environment, we'll be able to acquire the language spoken around us. And many people, beginning with philosophers and now more with hardcore scientists, believe that this is actually telling us something about what makes us human. And that's the question that I'm interested in. But to solve this question, we have to go a little bit beyond philosophy. We have to go a little bit beyond what linguists are doing. We have to actually combine the insights from various disciplines. In particular, we have to take really very seriously the many results that biologists are providing us about what makes us human. And so what we try to do, and I say we because I'm not alone in this enterprise, what we try to do is if you want, act as translators. We try to live
And now we arrive to the last of our guests. Our guest is a ICREA researcher also. He was born in Belgium, but he developed most of his career in the United States. Finally, he arrived to Catalonia almost 6 years ago, and he's a biolinguistics expert. Welcome, CEDRIC BOECKX.
Let me start by thanking you, Patricia, for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what I do, what we are interested in solving as problems. I don't think that I deserve the title creator, but for a living I build bridges, not bridges where people